Hey there, welcome to a new episode on this channel. Today it's not primarily about tarantulas in the wild, but more about the environment they live in and how you could reproduce it for your enclosures back at home, for your pet tarantulas. So I want to give you an impression on how the soil looks like in a rainforest and what else you could add that it looks more natural in general. So we will focus on this type of habitat first. You can see it in the background. It's a secondary rainforest. There are some big trees, so I think it's a mixture between primary and secondary rainforest. But anyway, it doesn't really matter. It's more about how the soil and the ground is, what materials are made of and what you're going to find. So we will focus more on the ground. It will give you more close-up shots and of course some explanation what this everything is, and of course more explanation regarding the type of plants or leaf litter, anything you will find here, and how you could actually use it for scaping your tank back at home. So let's start. So right in front of us there is a roadside embankment or a trail embankment, which you could easily reproduce within your enclosure because it has more of a slope, it is steep, and therefore it makes a perfect habitat for your tarantula back at home. So when you go closer, you'll see there is some moss-like structure. This is a special type of moss, so it does look a little bit different. It's an exotic type of moss, but you could, But you could certainly use moss if you have a species which likes it more humid. So all in all, if you focus more on this type, make sure that the structure of the soil, if we're going to look at it here, is like clay. So don't use cocoa fiber, pure cocoa fiber. Make sure you always add some clay-like structure and make sure you actually keep it moist, but in the end it will dry out on the inside and you can only moisturize it from the very top layer of soil. So if your whole terrarium or your whole tank actually is full of this type of material, then one part will certainly dry out, which benefits for the tarantula, so she could decide herself where she want to sit or where she want to burrow her hole actually. So this is certainly something you could do, and what's also very important to add, which is beneficial for the look of a rainforest terrarium, is of course leaf litter. You can certainly use leaf litter from your leaves you find outside from your forest, or you could buy exotic leaf litter, for example, as big as my hand. They get quite big. So this is something you should add for sure. So as you can see here, another special type of so that's another example of how you could use or build your tank. Actually there is a little frog, so I hope we will not disturb him. But if you're using rotten logs or rotten tree trunks, that's also beneficial, since underneath such logs there are tarantulas living, and you could just use one of these, and on top of them there will grow, or they probably, if you use some moss, there will grow moss on it if you have the right conditions in your tank and the right ventilation. So that's certainly a thing you should do if you want to keep it as natural as possible. Same over here, for example. If we go a little closer here, this is a rotten log, rotten type of wood, and these are actually used by a lot of tarantulas in the wild, and you could just use a log type like this, put some leaf litter on, make sure it has an entrance somewhere here, and therefore you have the perfect little rainforest enclosure. Another option would of course be the fact that you could use bigger trees like this one over here, and there are also very interesting parts where the tarantulas and spiders can actually live in. most of them will build tunnels underneath roots, so that's always a good idea to like use something like this. You can make a structure with a bigger rotten log and create a tunnel, so you have a nice little entrance and it looks perfectly fine also for your eye, and the tarantula of course does like it too. And if you're planning to get an arboreal specimen from the rainforest, you should also use natural resources and maybe use some smaller plants like this one in front here with small leaves, and in the background you see, for example, a bigger root from a living plant which goes to these big leaves. So if you have a smaller enclosure, you could just use one of the big plants, plant it there, and then just cut off the rest, use it in another enclosure, and just use the roots so that it looks more natural. I know that moss will not last long in most enclosure. That's due to the high humidity or lack of high humidity. So it's always, it's not the option for everyone, I know that. But if you have the option to maybe purchase exotic moss from a breeding, then you could certainly add this to your enclosure and make a spot a little bit wet. You see here, this is everything covered in moss, and it certainly looks quite nice to your tank. So this scenario right here is also very typical for arboreal species. If you have roots from different types of plants, different species of plants, who like usually from the top layer of the forest, there will a bird left over some seeds, and the seeds will grow all the way down until they reach the bottom, so they can actually get all the natural resources from the ground. But anyway, if you're looking at this structure here, there are perfect holes for tarantulas where they can hide, and that's usually the spot where we find species like Psalmopoeus or Tapinauchenius, and that's actually one of the things you could reproduce in your tank back home. Just use a few different logs or roots you can purchase, or you can go outside in your forest and collect a few little stuff, or you can go out in your forest and collect some stuff for your tanks back at home. Of course, not to sell them, but for personal use. That's usually not a problem. And then you can design something like this where the tarantula can hide, and use some plants to like perfectly make it look like it's within a rainforest. So that was it from today's video. I hope you liked this little excursion into the forest, trying to build your own tank, make it more rainforest-like. Make sure you leave a comment down below. Maybe you have some links to share with pictures of your enclosures who look like a rainforest. Will be interesting to see. I will certainly do another video when I'm back home, trying to escape a new tank and give you some tips and hints. There's also a nice channel from the Dark Den. Petco makes some really nice enclosures. You could check them out and hopefully build something similar to it